The light was a weapon. It dripped from a dozen crystal chandeliers, a suffocating opulence that pinned 1,000 curated smiles in place. In the grand atrium of the National Architectural Guild, success was a tangible, cloying perfume. Alara Vance stood at the heart of it, a still point in a swirling galaxy of champagne flutes and hushed ambition. Her gown, a column of midnight blue silk, was a statement of elegant austerity, a stark contrast to the room's gilded excess. It was, like her designs, built on clean lines and undeniable strength, with no need for superfluous ornamentation. Tonight was her coronation. The Pinnacle Award, the industry's highest honor, was waiting for her. At 34, she was the youngest architect ever to receive it. Her creation, the Solstice Tower, was more than a skyscraper. It was a manifesto cast in steel and photocatalytic concrete, a living building that breathed with the city, scrubbing the air clean while generating its own power. It was the culmination of a decade of relentless work. The final, gleaming proof that her vision was not just possible, but necessary. On the stage, bathed in a reverent spotlight, stood Julian Thorne. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored to within a millimeter of its life, to the world. He was the elder statesman of architecture, the mentor who had discovered a young, brilliant Alara Vance and given her a start. Alara knew him as something else, a monument of superficial charm built on a foundation of stolen credit. "True vision," Julian began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone that wrapped the room in its warmth, "is a rare and delicate thing. It must be nurtured, guided." He smiled, a flash of white teeth that didn't reach his cool, assessing eyes. "When Alara first came to my firm, a brilliant but unformed talent, I saw that spark. I saw the ghost of a skyscraper in her student sketches." Alara's hands, clasped loosely in front of her, did not move. Her face remained a placid mask. She remembered that first, smaller betrayal with perfect clarity. The design for the Atherton University Library, her concept, her late nights, her soul poured onto drafting paper. He had presented it as his own, with a few superficial changes, patting her on the back and calling her an invaluable contributor. He had taught her a vital lesson that day. A blueprint is also a battlefield. She had left his firm a week later, vowing to build an empire so formidable that his shadow could never touch her again. And she had. Solstice Tower was that empire. "And now," Julian continued, his arms spreading wide, "that spark has become an inferno of brilliance. The Solstice Tower is not just a building, it is a promise of a better future. A future Alara Vance has designed for us all. Let us see the vision that has earned her this historic honor." The massive screen behind him flickered to life. Alara took a small, steadying breath, preparing to see her work celebrated, to finally and irrevocably step out of his shadow. But the video that appeared was not hers. The music was ominous, a deep, thrumming score that vibrated through the floor, instead of the soaring, sun-drenched animation of her tower. The screen showed a dark, computer-generated rendering of its foundation, cracks, rendered in glowing, malevolent red, spiderwebbed across concrete supports. An authoritative voice, deep and somber, began to speak. "A hidden crisis lies at the heart of the celebrated Solstice Tower," the narrator intoned, as lines of fabricated data scrolled across the screen. "Our independent analysis, utilizing advanced seismic and materials stress simulations, reveals a catastrophic flaw in the foundational design." A gasp rippled through the atrium. The sea of smiles froze, curdling into masks of confusion and shock. Alara felt the air grow thin, the light of the chandeliers suddenly sharp and hostile. Her heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. The video cut to a supposed structural engineer, a man with a serious face and fictitious credentials displayed beneath his name. The Vance design utilizes an experimental composite in its load-bearing caissons, he explained, pointing to a complex, falsified diagram, under projected seismic stress. This material will experience catastrophic shear failure. Simply put, the building is a ticking time bomb. It was a lie, a breathtaking, meticulously crafted lie. The renderings were slick, the data plausible to the untrained eye, the expert testimony convincing. Julian hadn't just attacked her. He had weaponized her own discipline against her. He had built a perfect, beautiful lie to demolish her perfect, beautiful truth. The video reached its crescendo. A simulation showed the Solstice Tower, her magnificent, elegant tower, collapsing in on itself, a plume of dust and debris consuming a city block. The screen went black, and the final words appeared in stark white letters: the Vance deception. Silence. A deep, abyssal silence that swallowed the entire room. Every eye was on her. They were searching for a crack in her facade, a tremor of guilt, a flicker of panic. Julian turned from the screen, his face a mask of feigned shock and profound disappointment. It seems there is a grave matter that requires immediate investigation, he said, his voice laced with manufactured sorrow. The Guild cannot, in good conscience, proceed. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing in on her from all sides. It was the library all over again, but magnified 1,000 times. He wasn't just stealing her credit. He was salting the earth of her reputation, ensuring nothing could ever grow there again. And in that moment of absolute public ruin, Alara Vance did something no one expected. Her posture, which had been perfect, became impeccable. A strange, unnerving calm settled over her features. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not flee the stage. She met Julian's gaze across the crowded room, and a flicker of something cold and hard passed between them. It was not defeat. It was a promise. Her mind, the same mind that could visualize the intricate dance of steel and stress loads 50 stories in the air, was already working. She was not seeing the horrified faces in the crowd. She was seeing the flawed design of Julian's attack. She was seeing the stress points, the load-bearing lies, the faulty foundation of his treachery. A plan for revenge, she realized, was not so different from a blueprint for a building. It required precision, a deep understanding of structure, and a willingness to excavate until you hit bedrock. And when you were finished, you would build something new on the ruins of the old. She offered the stunned audience a single, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of regal composure in the face of annihilation, then turned and walked, not ran, from the atrium. The sound of her heels on the marble floor, the only sound in a world gone silent. The demolition had begun. The deconstruction would be hers. The silence in the offices of Vance Designs was heavier than concrete. 2 weeks after the gala, the open plan workspace, once a vibrant hub of creative energy, felt like a tomb. Empty desks stood as monuments to the dozen employees Alara had been forced to let go. The crisp white walls, usually covered in ambitious sketches and bold renderings, were now dominated by a single, massive print of the Solstice Tower, a ghost of a future that would never be. Alara sat at her conference table, a sleek expanse of polished oak that now served as her war table. The remains of a lukewarm coffee sat beside her laptop. For 48 hours. She had done nothing but dissect the lie. The doctored video played on a loop on the large monitor on the wall. The sound muted, frame by frame. She deconstructed it, her architect's eye identifying the subtle impossibilities in the faked physics. The digital tells in the rendering, The door creaked open. Leo Reyes stood in the doorway, his face etched with a familiar mixture of exhaustion and defiant loyalty. At 26, he was a prodigy of computational design, the only member of her senior staff who had refused to leave. He saw architecture not as lines on paper, but as streams of data, and he believed in Alara's data above all else. "Another one pulled out," he said, his voice flat. He held up his phone, displaying an email from their primary materials supplier for the tower. The board invoked a reputational risk clause in the contract. "They're gone." Alara didn't look up from her screen. "Let them go." Ilara. That was the last one. "The investors have frozen all assets. The construction permits have been suspended pending the guild's investigation. We have nothing left but this office. And the lease is up in a month." He ran a hand through his already disheveled black hair. "What are we doing?" "An autopsy," Alara said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were clear, devoid of panic. It was the unnerving calm from the gala, now honed to a razor's edge. Every structure has a point of failure. Julian's lie is a structure. I'm finding its weaknesses. Leo walked over and looked at her screen. It was covered in annotations, pointing out inconsistencies in light sourcing, impossible material textures, rendering artifacts. "I've been doing the same," he said, pulling up a chair. "The simulation software, the light refraction algorithms are proprietary. They belong to Thorne Dynamics." It was the first piece of hard evidence. The digital fingerprint. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Alara's face. "I knew it. He built the weapon in his own factory." "There's more," Leo said, leaning closer. "This wasn't just a smear campaign. This was a hostile takeover, disguised as a public service announcement." Before Alara could respond, her desk phone buzzed. It was the first call she'd received in days that wasn't a creditor or a gloating journalist. The caller ID read Marcus Cole. Cole was a Pulitzer-nominated journalist for the New York Chronicle, a man who had built his career on dismantling powerful figures. He had written a glowing profile of Alara and the Solstice Tower just a month before the gala. His follow-up piece had been cautiously skeptical, reporting the accusations, but noting the unprecedented nature of the public attack. "Put him on speaker," Alara said. "Vance." Cole's voice was gravelly, impatient. "I'm on a deadline. The Guild's preliminary report is about to drop, and my sources say it's going to crucify you. I'm giving you one last chance to give me your side of the story. Off the record, on the record. I don't care, but silence looks like guilt." "The truth isn't a story, Mr. Cole. It's a fact," Alara replied, her voice cool and even. "And the fact is, the data presented in that video was fabricated." "Can you prove it?" "We're working on it," Leo interjected. "Working on it doesn't stop a wrecking ball." Cole shot back. "Thorne is a titan. He's got the entire industry in his pocket. You're coming at the king. You best not miss." "I don't miss," Ilara said. The simple statement hung in the air, imbued with an authority that gave even the cynical journalist pause. "Julian Thorne didn't just attack my project. He's planning to seize it. We have reason to believe this was a premeditated effort to force my firm into insolvency and acquire the Solstice Tower assets at a fraction of their value." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "That's a big accusation. Vance, if you can back that up with more than reason to believe, you've got a real story. Until then, you've just got a motive for libel." The line went dead. Alara looked at Leo. "He's right. We need more than a digital signature. We need the blueprint of the whole conspiracy." Leo turned his laptop toward her. He had been running decryption algorithms on fragments of code he'd found embedded in the video file. Now. A string of text was resolving on the screen. It was a partial email, encrypted and deleted, but a ghost of it remained in the file's metadata. From J. Thorne to B. Calloway. Subject, Phase 2, Containment. Bradley. The presentation was a resounding success. Public opinion is turning. The Guild will suspend her license by week's end. Have the legal team finalize the injunction and the asset seizure proposal. Emphasize the public safety angle. We are not vultures. We are saviors. Stepping in to fix a mess of her own making. Bradley Calloway. He was the head of the Guild's ethics committee. The man Julian had put in charge of her investigation. This was it. The inciting incident. The irrefutable proof that this was not a professional dispute, but a coordinated, malicious attack designed to systematically erase her from the industry she had dedicated her life to. Julian wasn't content to see her fail. He wanted to own her failure, to stand on the ruins of her career and call himself a hero. Alara stared at the email, then at the rendering of her tower on the wall. For 2 weeks, she had been reeling, absorbing the blows, assessing the damage. Now, the shock receded, replaced by a cold, clarifying fury. The grief for her lost project, her shattered reputation, crystallized into purpose. She turned to Leo, her eyes blazing with an intense, calculated fire. "He thinks this is over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He thinks he's won. He's just watched the controlled demolition of my career." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city she had dreamed of reshaping. But every architect knows that before you can build something new, you have to clear the site. He's cleared the site for me. She turned back, a faint, dangerous smile on her lips. He doesn't want to compete with me. He wants to demolish me. So we will design a better demolition, a more precise one. We're not going to expose his lie. Leo. We're going to deconstruct his entire empire, piece by piece, until nothing is left but the faulty foundation it was built on. The first counterattack was a textbook maneuver, executed with precision and doomed from the start. Armed with the partial email, Alara requested an emergency hearing with the Architectural Guild's Ethics Committee. She presented her evidence, Leo's analysis of the rendering software, and the damning communication between Julian Thorne and the committee's own chairman, Bradley Calloway. The room was a study in sterile tension, all polished mahogany and muted gray flannel. Calloway and the other board members, all of them men who owed their careers in some way to Julian's influence, listened with expressions of polite, impenetrable skepticism. "Ms. Vance," Calloway began, his tone dripping with condescension after she finished. "What you've presented is circumstantial at best. A fragment of a supposed email, an allegation about software that is widely used in the industry. It sounds less like evidence and more like the desperate flailing of a career in freefall." "The metadata is verifiable," Leo insisted. Stepping forward, "The encryption signature can be traced." "Mr. Reyes, you are not a member of this guild," another board member interjected smoothly. "We are discussing the professional conduct of Ms. Vance, not entertaining the conspiracy theories of her IT department." The hearing was a farce. They turned her evidence against her, painting it as a malicious attempt to deflect blame. The committee voted unanimously not only to dismiss her complaint, but to accelerate their investigation into her, citing her unfounded and defamatory accusations as further proof of unprofessional conduct. She had walked in seeking justice and walked out with a fresh set of shackles. The next blow landed less than 24 hours later. A courier delivered a thick, intimidating legal envelope to her office. It was a cease and desist letter from the formidable law firm of Sterling, Thorne and Finch Julian's family firm. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. threatening a $50 million defamation lawsuit if she or any of her associates made any further public or private statements regarding Julian Thorne or Thorne Dynamics. She was officially, legally gagged. "He's boxed us in," Leo said, staring at the letter as if it were radioactive. "We can't go to the guild. We can't go to the press. We can't even talk to our former clients without risking a lawsuit that would bury us forever." Alara stood by the window, rereading the letter. It wasn't just a threat. It was a statement of power. Julian wasn't just winning. He was demonstrating the sheer, overwhelming force of his influence. He wanted her to feel utterly, hopelessly outmatched. Her one remaining hope was Marcus Cole. He was an outsider, a man whose currency was truth, not influence. She met him in a noisy, anonymous coffee shop downtown, the scent of burnt espresso hanging in the air. She slid a copy of the cease and desist letter across the table. Cole read it, his expression unchanging. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "It's ironclad. Thorne has you in a legal stranglehold." "This is proof of a cover-up," Ilara argued, her voice low and urgent. "This isn't the action of an innocent man. This is what you do when you have something to hide. It's also what you do when you have deep pockets and a reputation to protect from a rival," Cole countered. "I can't run with this. Ilara, not without a smoking gun. My editor would kill me. Thorne's lawyers would own this paper by Friday." He leaned forward. "I believe you. But believing isn't enough in my business. I need something irrefutable. Something that even Julian Thorne's army of lawyers can't spin." He left her there, the bitter coffee a perfect match for the taste of defeat in her mouth. She had tried a direct assault and had been repelled at every turn. Her allies were silenced, her resources dwindling, her name synonymous with fraud. The final, most painful obstacle came in the form of a betrayal. David Chen, a respected engineer and an old friend of her father's, was one of the few people in the industry who had privately reached out to offer support, believing he was her last trusted ally. Alara confided in him, sharing the details of her findings and Julian's legal threats, hoping his professional standing could lend her credibility. 2 days later, an article appeared in a rival newspaper. It was a scathing op-ed, authored by David Chen himself. In it, he wrote of his deep disappointment in Alara Vance. He claimed she had approached him with wild, unsubstantiated theories in an attempt to bully him into supporting her. He concluded that her actions were a disgrace to her father's memory. Julian had gotten to him, whether through threats or promises. He had turned her father's friend into another one of his weapons. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, isolating her completely and using the legacy she held most sacred against her. That evening, Alara stood alone in the dark, empty office. The power had been shut off. The only light came from the city glow, filtering through the large windows. She was legally silenced, professionally ostracized, and personally betrayed. A direct assault had been impossible, a fool's errand. Julian's fortress was impregnable from the front. But every fortress, no matter how imposing, has a back door. Every structure has hidden flaws, unseen vulnerabilities. She had been thinking like a fighter, trying to punch through his walls. She needed to start thinking like an architect again. She didn't need to break down his door. She needed the blueprints. She needed to map out his entire structure, his business dealings, his political connections, his personal life, and find the single, critical stress point that would bring the whole thing down. She couldn't fight him on his terms. In his world of influence and power, she had to drag him onto her ground, the world of structural integrity, where facades and ornamentation mean nothing, and the truth of what lies beneath is all that matters. She looked at her phone, the screen illuminating her determined face in the darkness. She had one last asset, the loft she owned downtown. It was time to disappear. It was time to go underground and start excavating. The loft was an exercise in brutalist minimalism, a concrete and glass box tucked away in an anonymous industrial building overlooking the city's forgotten rail yards. It was a space Alara had bought years ago as an architectural experiment. A blank canvas. Now, it would become her war room. She sold her elegant uptown condo, liquidating her last major asset for operating capital. Everything she and Leo needed was moved into the cavernous main room: servers, drafting tables, monitors, and walls of corkboard that were soon covered in a spiderweb of connections, names, and corporate structures. They went underground. Alara Vance, the disgraced starchitect, effectively vanished. She worked from the shadows, her only contact with the outside world through encrypted channels. Her new life was a monkish existence, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. Their strategy shifted from defense to offense, from reaction to reconnaissance. The target was no longer the lie about the Solstice Tower, but the man who had constructed it. Their new project was the complete deconstruction of Julian Thorne. Every one of his projects is a facade, Alara explained to Leo, gesturing to a board covered in images of Thorne's gleaming, ostentatious buildings. He's celebrated for his aesthetics, his bold forms. But it's all ornamentation. He prioritizes the skin of the building over its bones. That kind of design philosophy creates vulnerabilities. It's inefficient, it's expensive, and it invites compromise. Her architectural knowledge became her primary weapon. She began a deep dive into Julian's current magnum opus, the Olympus Project. It was a massive, multi-billion-dollar redevelopment of the city's waterfront. A city within a city that would be Julian's crowning legacy. Alara procured the public schematics and began her analysis. Not as a rival, but as a forensic engineer. She spent days running simulations, calculating load distributions, and analyzing material specifications. She was looking for the shortcuts she knew had to be there. Meanwhile, Leo became their digital ghost, haunting the servers of Thorne Dynamics. He was no longer just looking for emails. He was mapping their entire digital infrastructure. He followed the money, navigating a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts designed to obscure the flow of capital. He cross-referenced shipping manifests from Thorne's suppliers with the project's official material orders, searching for discrepancies. "He's billing the city for German-engineered steel," Leo announced one night, pointing to two different spreadsheets on his monitor. But the port manifests show he's importing cheaper, lower-grade steel from a manufacturer in South America known for cutting corners. The cost difference is over $80 million. It was the first major crack in the foundation: financial fraud, provable, quantifiable, and criminal. Alara pinned the two documents side by side on the board. "It's not just about the money," she said, her eyes tracing the lines of the Olympus Project's structural frame. "Using substandard steel means every one of his stress calculations is wrong. The building isn't as strong as he claims it is. Find me the point of maximum stress. Find the weakest joint." Their small operation gained a reluctant third member, Marcus Cole, unable to shake the feeling that he was missing the real story. Reached out through a secure messaging app. "Still alive." Vance, his message read, "Find that smoking gun yet." Alara took a calculated risk. She invited him to the loft. When he arrived, his cynical journalistic demeanor faltered as he took in the sheer scale of their investigation. It looked like the headquarters for a clandestine intelligence operation. "All right, Vance," he said, impressed despite himself. "You have my attention." Alara didn't need Cole to publish a story. She needed his sources. She needed the human element, the people Julian had stepped on during his ascent. Marcus, with his decades of contacts, was the key, reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction. He began to work his old channels. He tracked down disgruntled former architects from Thorne Dynamics, engineers who had been fired for raising safety concerns, and city officials who had been mysteriously reassigned after questioning the Olympus project's bidding process. He brought them stories. A project manager who was forced to sign off on falsified concrete purity tests. A city inspector who was offered a consulting fee to overlook code violations. Each story was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in the coffin they were meticulously building. They worked in a fluid, complementary rhythm. Alara provided the architectural theory, identifying where the structural or ethical compromises were most likely to occur. Leo provided the digital proof, the hard data that underpinned her theories. Marcus provided the human confirmation, the voices that could give testimony to the rot within Julian's empire. One evening, Alara was running a thermal expansion simulation on the Olympus project's glass curtain wall, a signature element of Julian's design. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet with discovery. She pointed to a section of the simulation glowing bright red. "The fastening system for the glass panels. He's using a cheaper aluminum alloy that he's hidden in the specs. In extreme temperature fluctuations, the expansion and contraction will be mismatched with the steel frame. Over time, it will cause microscopic fractures. It wouldn't fail tomorrow, or next year. But in 10 years, 15, the panels at the corners, the points of maximum wind shear, could detach." Leo immediately started digging through supplier invoices for the specific alloy. Marcus put in a call to a former Thorne employee who had worked on the curtain wall procurement. The pieces were all there, a mountain of evidence meticulously gathered and cross-referenced. They had mapped the load-bearing lies of Julian Thorne's entire career. They had proof of financial fraud, bribery, and a catastrophic, concealed design flaw in his legacy project. They had built their case, solid and irrefutable. But as Alara looked at the web of corruption spread across her wall, a new, unsettling question began to form. The sheer scale of the fraud, the viciousness of the attack on her. It felt like more than just greed or professional jealousy. The rage behind it felt personal. Why did Julian Thorne hate her enough to not just defeat her, but to annihilate her? The answer, she suspected, was not in his blueprints, but in his past. She turned to Marcus. "I need you to dig deeper," she said. "Forget his projects. I want to know everything about his family, specifically, his father." Marcus Cole was a bloodhound when it came to digging through archives. He disappeared into the dusty digital catacombs of old newspaper databases and public records. A week later, he returned to the loft and placed a single, faded newspaper clipping on the table. The headline, from a 1988 edition of the City Chronicle, read, "Westgate Tower Collapse, Faulty Design Blamed. Firm Dissolved." Alara picked it up. The black and white photo showed a twisted wreck of steel and concrete, a catastrophic structural failure that had killed 3 construction workers. The article detailed the subsequent investigation, which had ruined one of the city's most promising architectural firms, Thorne and Vance. The names hit her like a physical blow. Alistair Thorne, Julian's father, and Arthur Vance, her own. "They were partners," Marcus said, his voice gentle. "By all accounts, they were the talk of the town. The next big thing, the Westgate project, was supposed to be their masterpiece." Alara read the article with a growing sense of dread. The investigation had concluded that Alistair Thorne was solely responsible for a critical miscalculation in the foundational specifications. Arthur Vance, her father, had been formally exonerated, his testimony crucial in assigning blame to his partner. Alistair Thorne was ruined. Marcus continued, pulling up other articles on his laptop. The lawsuits bankrupted him. The guild revoked his license. He died of a heart attack 3 years later. A broken man. Your father, on the other hand, went on to found Vance Designs. His career skyrocketed. He became a legend. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The rage, the personal venom, the need to not just beat her, but to disgrace her using the very same tactic, a public accusation of a fatal design flaw. This was never about the Solstice Tower. It was about Westgate. Julian Thorne was fighting a ghost war. A battle started a generation ago. He was avenging his father by inflicting the exact same public ruin upon the daughter of the man he believed had destroyed him. "He thinks my father framed him," Ilara whispered, the words tasting like ash. That night, after Leo and Marcus had left, Ilara went to a climate-controlled storage unit where she kept her father's old records. She found what she was looking for, a series of leather-bound journals. Her father had been a meticulous record keeper. She found the entries for 1988. His elegant, architectural script filled the pages, but the words were a storm of conflict. He wrote of his devastation over the collapse, his grief for the men who had died. He wrote about Alistair, his friend, his partner. Alistair is a ghost at the hearing. One entry read, "He barely speaks. His eyes are hollow. They are laying the entire weight of this tragedy at his feet. And he is not fighting back. I testified today. I told them the truth as the evidence shows it. The final calculations were his domain. My own were sound." But as Ilara read on, she found other, more ambiguous entries, written late at night, the script less steady. "I look at the plans again and again, searching for my own culpability. Could I have seen it? Should I have double-checked his work in a partnership? Where does one man's responsibility end and another's begin? The line is blurred, but the law demands a sharp one, and it has been drawn." There was guilt in his words, the profound sorrow of a survivor. But there was no confession. Nothing to support Julian's apparent belief that his father had been deliberately framed. Her father had been cleared. The evidence had pointed to Alistair Thorne. The revelation transformed the nature of her quest. This was no longer about professional survival or even revenge. It was about legacy, honor, and a historical truth that had been buried for 30 years. Her fight was now inextricably linked with her father's. To clear her own name, she now realized she had to defend his. And to do that, she had to utterly and completely dismantle the son who was trying to destroy them both. Her resolve hardened. The blueprints for Julian's deconstruction were nearly complete. But now, they had a new, personal, and far more dangerous dimension. The shift was subtle at first. A faint tremor in the digital world. An encrypted file on the city planning server would be moved. A firewall at Thorne Dynamics would report a new, more sophisticated probe. Julian Thorne didn't know who was coming for him, but he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. The hunter was becoming aware that he, too, was being hunted. He responded with the brute force that had always served him. His internal security team, a group of ruthless corporate fixers, launched a sweeping digital counteroffensive. They laid traps, honeypots of fake data designed to lure his unseen adversary into the open. "He's baiting us," Leo said, pointing to a file that had suddenly become accessible on the Olympus Project's server. It was labeled Geotechnical Survey Confidential. This contains falsified data showing even greater foundational weaknesses than we found. If we leak this, his team can trace it back to us and discredit everything by proving this specific document is a fabrication. It was a trap that Marcus Cole, hungry for his smoking gun, nearly sprung. He got a tip from an anonymous source, Julian's team, no doubt pointing him toward the file. Only a last-minute, frantic call from Alara stopped him from publishing a story that would have destroyed their own credibility. The near miss sent a chill through their small operation. Julian was not just powerful, he was cunning. The threat escalated from the digital to the physical. Marcus had been cultivating a source, a city inspector named Frank Madsen, who was ready to go on the record about the bribes he had received from Thorn Dynamics. They had arranged a clandestine meeting. The night before, they were scheduled to talk. Madsen was involved in a workplace accident at a construction site. He fell from a scaffolding and was now in a medically induced coma at the city hospital. The police report ruled it an accident, but the message was clear and terrifying. Julian Thorn did not play by any rules. "This has to stop," Marcus told Alara, his face pale. He was a journalist who exposed white-collar criminals, not a spy tangling with a man who dealt in silencing witnesses. "This is out of my league. He could have killed that man." "He's trying to frighten us, Marcus, to make us back down," Alara said, though her own composure was shaken. "Well, it's working," he shot back. "I have a family. Alara, I can't be a part of this anymore. It's too dangerous." She couldn't blame him. She had asked him to help expose a fraud, not to risk his life, for his own safety. She had to cut him loose. "You're right," she said quietly. "You've done more than enough. Go back to your editor. Tell him the lead went cold. Disconnect from us completely." His departure left a void. The team was down to 2. The pressure in the loft became immense, a mixture of paranoia and grim determination. They were more isolated than ever, their enemy now fully aware and on the offensive. Julian's next move was a direct assault, using the considerable political capital he wielded at City Hall. He fast-tracked the final approval hearing for the Olympus project. It was scheduled for 2 weeks' time. He was accelerating his endgame, trying to push his legacy project past the point of no return before his hidden enemy could strike. "He's forcing our hand," Leo said, looking at the public notice for the hearing. "Once that project gets final approval and the public bonds are issued, it will be unstoppable. Whatever we have to use it now." Alara looked at the board, at the mountain of evidence they had compiled. It was a powerful case, but they had lost their key witness in Madsen. Their evidence was technical, digital compelling, but potentially dismissible as a complex smear campaign by a disgraced rival. They needed a stage. They needed a moment of maximum impact from which Julian could not escape. She looked at the notice again. The hearing would be public, live-streamed. A room full of investors, politicians, and the media. It was the perfect arena. A formal, high-stakes forum that mirrored the awards gala where her nightmare had begun. "He thinks he's checkmating us," Alara said, a slow, dangerous smile forming on her lips. "But he's just moved his king into the open." She began pacing, her mind racing, visualizing the room, the attendees, the flow of events. "We can't give this to a journalist. We can't leak it. We have to deliver the final blow ourselves, in public, where he can't spin it, can't deny it, and can't escape it." She stopped and turned to Leo. "Get me a list of every single person on the City Planning Commission. I want to know who they're married to, where their kids go to school, what stocks they own, and get me registered for the public comment period at that hearing. The city charter guarantees any citizen 3 minutes at the podium." Leo looked at her, his eyes wide. "You're going to confront him yourself. In that room, his territory." "It's not his territory," Alara corrected. "It's a public hearing. And I am a member of the public. He built his career on grand presentations. It's only fitting that it ends with one. The risk was enormous. She would be walking into the lion's den, alone and exposed. But it was the only move she had left. It was time to execute her own controlled demolition. The hearing room was a theater of civic power, all polished wood and hushed importance. At the front, the city planning commissioners sat on a raised dais, a panel of judges before whom Julian Thorne was performing his final, triumphant monologue. He stood at a sleek lectern, a large screen behind him displaying glorious renderings of his Olympus project. The room was packed with city council members, investors in tailored suits, and a dozen journalists, including Marcus Cole, who watched from the back, a knot of tension in his stomach. Julian was in his element, his voice resonating with passion and civic pride as he described the parks, the gleaming towers, the economic prosperity his project would bring. Olympus is more than a collection of buildings, he declared, his arms spread wide. It is a vision for our city's future, a legacy of ambition and beauty we will leave for our children. As he concluded to a round of enthusiastic applause, the commission chairman, a man whose re-election campaign was heavily funded by Thorne's associates, smiled broadly. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. A truly inspiring vision. We will now open the floor for the final public comment period." A list of names was read. A local activist spoke against the project's environmental impact. A small business owner voiced concerns about displacement. Then the chairman read the next name, a hint of confusion in his voice. Ilara Vance. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Julian Thorne's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He turned, his eyes locking onto the back of the room as Ilara stood and began to walk toward the public podium. She moved with the same unnerving calm she had displayed at the gala. Her expression serene, her steps measured. She was not a victim seeking pity. She was an architect arriving to present her findings. She reached the simple wooden podium and adjusted the microphone. She did not look at the commissioners or the audience. She looked directly at Julian. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent room. "My name is Ilara Vance. I am an architect and a citizen of this city. I am not here today to speak about the aesthetic merits of the Olympus project. I am here to present an alternative structural analysis." She placed a slim tablet on the podium, and, with a tap, the massive screen behind Julian switched from his glorious renderings to one of her own. It was a stark, black and white structural wireframe of his main tower. The public plans for this project call for A572 grade 50 steel, a high-strength, domestically sourced material. She stated, "However, shipping manifests from the Port Authority, cross-referenced with invoices from Thorne Dynamics' own shell corporation, Apex Global Logistics, show the importation of over 40,000 tons of inferior, recycled steel with inconsistent tensile strength." She swiped the tablet. Financial records and shipping documents filled the screen, the evidence Leo had unearthed. Gasps rippled through the investor section. This substitution represents a fraudulent billing to the city of approximately $83 million. Ilara continued, her voice devoid of emotion. But more importantly, it means the entire structure is compromised. Another swipe. Her simulation appeared on screen, showing a glowing red stress point at the building's core. Using substandard materials creates a critical vulnerability. Under sustained wind load, particularly at the upper floors, the structure is susceptible to harmonic resonance, leading to progressive structural failure. The Olympus project is not just a fraud, it is a potential catastrophe. Julian's face had become a pale, rigid mask. "This is an outrage," he boomed, stepping forward, This is a baseless attack by a disgraced and vengeful competitor. Her license is under review for professional misconduct. My conduct is not the subject of this hearing, Ilara said, her gaze unwavering. The structural integrity of a $2 billion public project is... She kept going, her presentation methodical, relentless. She exposed the faulty concrete tests. She detailed the flawed curtain wall design, showing simulations of glass panels shearing off in a storm, with every swipe of her tablet. Another piece of his empire crumbled. His allies on the commission shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The journalists were scribbling furiously. She had saved her final piece of evidence for last, the direct link between Thorne Dynamics and Frank Madsen. The city inspector, now lying in a coma. Leo had traced a series of payments from another Thorne shell company to an account belonging to Madsen's wife. As she prepared to deliver this final, killing blow, her own phone, resting on the podium, vibrated silently. A message from Leo. Urgent. Found new file on your father's backup server. Fully decrypted. You need to see this now. Her finger hovered over the screen of her tablet. Below the podium. Leo, disguised as a member of the public, discreetly passed her another tablet. Her eyes flickered down. It was a scanned document. A letter, typed on her father's old letterhead. Dated a week after the Westgate collapse. It was addressed to his personal lawyer. Her breath caught in her chest. I must confess, her father had written, that my guilt is heavier than anyone knows. I saw the error in Alistair's foundation calculations a week before the concrete pour. I questioned him, but he was arrogant, convinced of his genius. He dismissed my concerns. I could have forced the issue. I could have gone to the engineers, to the client. But it would have delayed the project, damaged the firm's reputation, and tarnished my own rising star. I chose to remain silent, gambling that the margin of error was sufficient. I gambled and lost. I allowed him to take the entirety of the blame because the alternative was to admit my own catastrophic negligence. I am allowing an innocent, albeit arrogant, man's life to be destroyed to preserve my own. The world tilted. The foundation of her own life, the bedrock of her father's unimpeachable legacy, crumbled to dust in an instant. Julian wasn't a paranoid son seeking revenge for a perceived wrong. He was right. His father had been the scapegoat. Her father, her hero, was complicit. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes meeting Julian's across the room. He was a cornered animal, his face a mess of fury and fear. In her hand, she held the document that would not only vindicate his father, but obliterate her own. She could destroy him completely, but it would mean destroying the memory of the man who had inspired her. The entire room was waiting. The livestream camera was a merciless red eye. She had to make a choice. In this moment, in front of the world. She took a slow, deliberate breath. The cycle of destruction, the vendetta that had spanned a generation, ended here, with her. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze piercing through his crumbling facade. She put the tablet with her father's letter face down on the podium. There is always a chain of responsibility in a project's failure, she said, her voice softer now, but carrying an immense weight. Sometimes the flaws are inherited, passed down from one generation to the next. A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face. But the flaws in this project, she continued, her voice hardening again as she gestured to the screen. The fraud, the greed, the reckless endangerment of public safety. These are not inherited. They are a choice. Your choice. She never presented the evidence about the inspector. She didn't need to. It was enough. She had exposed his crimes, his corruption, his lies. She had ruined him with his own sins, not his father's, and not hers. She had achieved justice without perpetuating the vendetta. It was a small, silent act of grace in the midst of a righteous demolition. "My 3 minutes are up," she said simply. She picked up her tablet and walked away from the podium, leaving behind the deafening silence of a legacy in ruins. In the days that followed, Julian Thorne's empire crumbled with breathtaking speed. The Olympus project was suspended indefinitely. City and federal prosecutors launched sweeping investigations into Thorne dynamics. Investors fled, partners cut ties, and the media, led by a vindicated Marcus Cole, feasted on the carcass of his reputation. The fortress had been brought down not by a battering ram, but by the quiet, inexorable force of its own internal weaknesses, exposed for all to see. Alara watched the fallout from the quiet sanctuary of her loft. The news played on a muted television in the corner, a distant storm she had unleashed. She sat with Leo and Marcus around the oak table, the letter from her father lying between them like a sacred, terrible relic. "He was my hero," she said, her voice thick with a grief that was 30 years old and a day old. "All at once, everything I am, everything I've built, was on the foundation of his integrity, and it was a lie." "It was a flaw," Marcus corrected gently. "A terrible one. But it doesn't erase the rest of the man, or the woman he raised." "The choice you made in that room," Leo added, "to stop the cycle, that was your choice, not his." She knew they were right, but the knowledge was a cold comfort. She had won, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the sins of her father. She had set out to reclaim her legacy, only to discover it was built on a lie. 2 weeks later, she received an encrypted message from a disposable email address. "Meet me. The reflecting pool at the Kimball Art Museum. Sunset. Come alone." There was no signature, but she knew who it was from. She found Julian sitting on a stone bench, looking out over the tranquil water. He seemed smaller, diminished, the arrogant architecture of his personality stripped down to a fragile, human frame. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His silver hair was unkempt. He didn't look at her as she sat down on the other end of the bench. "Why?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You had it, didn't you? The proof about my father. I saw it in your eyes. You could have destroyed everything. Why didn't you?" "Because your father and mine already destroyed enough," Alara said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Another ruin wasn't going to build anything new. Your crimes were your own. Julian, that was enough." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled not with hatred, but with a deep, bottomless exhaustion. "I spent my entire life hating him, hating your father. I built my whole career on the idea of being better than him, of avenging my father by becoming everything he couldn't be. And then, I became him, a man who cut corners, who lied, who put ambition ahead of integrity." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "My father was a scapegoat. I was just a fraud." For a long time, they sat in silence as the sun bled across the sky, two orphans of a shared, tragic history. There was no apology offered, no forgiveness requested. There was only the quiet, somber understanding of two lives irrevocably shaped by the failures of their fathers. "What will you do now?" Alara asked. "Disappear," he said. "Let the lawyers pick over the bones." He stood up, his movements stiff. "My father. He wasn't a bad architect. You know, before Westgate. He was brilliant." "I know," Alara said. And for the first time, she believed it was true. He walked away without another word, a ghost disappearing into the twilight, leaving Alara alone with the reflection of a world she had broken apart. And now, had to figure out how to rebuild. 6 months later, the skeletal frame of the Solstice Tower once again clawed at the sky. The crisp autumn air rang with the percussive sound of construction, a symphony of renewal. On the ground below, standing amidst the controlled chaos of the worksite, Elara Vance held a small press conference. Her firm, leaner but stronger, was back. The Guild, under new leadership, had publicly exonerated her and permanently revoked Julian's license. The Solstice Tower was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of resilience. "Today marks a new beginning," she said, her voice clear and confident against the backdrop of noise. "But it's also a moment to acknowledge the past. The architectural and construction industries are built on trust. When that trust is broken, the consequences can be devastating, impacting not just balance sheets, but lives." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "That is why today, I am announcing that the initial profits from the Solstice Tower will be used to seed a new organization, the Vance Thorne Foundation." A murmur went through the assembled journalists. "The foundation," she explained, "will be dedicated to promoting ethical practices and accountability within our industry. It will fund independent oversight programs and, most importantly, provide financial and emotional support to the families of workers affected by construction and engineering disasters. We cannot erase the failures of the past, but we can build a better, safer future from their ruins." It was a final, quiet act of reconciliation, a way to honor the truth of what both their fathers had done, one by action, one by inaction, and to turn a legacy of ruin into one of healing and rebuilding. Later that day, back in her newly reopened office, a package was waiting on her desk. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, with no return address. Inside, she found a small, worn, leather-bound sketchbook. Tucked within its pages was a handwritten note on elegant, cream-colored stationery. "Ms. Vance, I saw your announcement on the news. What you are doing is an act of profound grace. For 30 years, I have lived with the ghost of my husband, Alistair, and the shame of what he became. And I have lived with the silence of my son, Julian, who let his quest for vengeance consume him. He checked himself into a long-term care facility last month. Perhaps he will finally find some peace. Thank you for not destroying the memory of the man my husband was, before he was broken. Thank you for choosing to build instead of demolish. Sincerely, Eleanor Thorne." Elara's hands trembled slightly as she opened the sketchbook. It was filled with drawings, not architectural blueprints, but beautiful, visionary sketches, flowing, organic forms, buildings that seemed to grow from the earth, ideas that were decades ahead of their time. It was the work of Alistair Thorne, the brilliant architect, before the collapse. It was the legacy that had been buried, now returned to the light. She looked out her window at the rising Solstice Tower, its clean lines a testament to integrity and truth. The past could never be undone, its foundations irrevocably flawed. But upon it, she had built something new, something strong, something that could, perhaps, finally touch the sky.